Neurotrain Collaborative, our podcast number 10 we're here for today. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Katie, my colleagues Erin and Kelly, and we are all part of the Neurotrain Collaborative. We are here today to talk about grains and how grains have changed, and a little bit about why we hear so much about celiac disease, why we hear so much about grain intolerances now, gluten intolerances, and how that's changed, and why we didn't see it as much in the early 1900s or the 1800s, and now we're seeing it a lot more today. So to jump right in, the way that grains have been grown has changed dramatically. So in really since the early 1900s, with Mendel changing things and starting to look at how propagation happens, if you remember back to your biology classes, and then in the 1960s it shifted a little bit again. But in the US, we try to find ways to grow things maybe where they shouldn't be grown. We try to make the best use of all the land that we can, and we grow grains in Wisconsin, for instance. And Wisconsin does not have the best climate for grains. I'm from here. It gets really, really cold. We don't have the right climate for grains to be grown if this were 1950s even. And so we started shifting those grains around and making them a lot more hardy to withstand not only big temperature swings, but also all of the insects that will go after those grains as they are being grown in the field. And so we started adding fertilizers, we started adding pesticides, we started making the plant a whole lot hardier to withstand that weather. And it's not really surprising that when it goes through your gut, that it's also hardier. It's hard to digest because it's made to withstand crazy Wisconsin weather, or African weather, or places again that just maybe are not the right climate for what grains originally were. So I don't know. I don't notice as much of a shift with me. Like in the first day after eating bread, I'm fine. I feel good. I'm not bloated, no headaches, nothing. And then like a day or two later is when I start to see the shift in skin, for me personally. What have you guys experienced?
For me, yeah, I noticed it in my digestion. I noticed that I may have increased pain in places that are prone to arthritis. And it is, for me, it's a day or two later also, which kind of makes it hard to track, right? Because we're pretty spur of the moment. When we eat something, we're looking most of the time like a half hour or maybe 6 to 12 hours later for changes. And it goes through the gut a little more slowly, and it takes time to get the endotoxin. We'll talk about this too. What happens to the grain when it moves through you is a longer process. And then by the time it gets to your liver with all the different things that come along with those grains, that ends up showing up in the way that I just feel in my gut system, in my joints. And I don't think for me it shows up as much in my skin, but I definitely just feel a little yuckier in general. And I am also somebody who grew up with a lot of bread in my childhood, and processed bread. And we didn't really eat a lot of homemade bread. So bread that comes in stores is not only a type of wheat that is industrialized and much hardier and harder to digest, but it also comes with all of the other additives that in our group here we are avoiding, because those things bog down our digestion as well. So I have this internal, and part of the desire for sugar. When I feel a sugar craving, sometimes I just want to eat a muffin, or I just want to eat a cookie. And at this time of year, that becomes a desire that you can satisfy pretty readily because cookies and breads and pies and things are around a little bit more. And I live in California, and I don't use my oven in the summertime because it's too hot where I live to turn my oven on in my house. So by the time fall and winter come around, I want to bake and I want to put stuff in the oven. And that's hard when I'm trying to avoid the grains that bog down my entire system. I notice they can, if it goes on for a prolonged period of time, it can really impact my immunity and my immune system. So I try to keep things easier to digest for those reasons. And because in the long term, they keep me pain free, they keep my immune system up, and they reduce my family inclination towards any kinds of arthritis and heart disease and liver disease and things that I'm trying to avoid. So I wanted to touch base on how let's talk too about how do we deal with this? How can we satisfy the fall and winter craving to have a house that smells like good baked goods and not suffer on the inside? What There are some strategies, and yeah, there's something else out there.
There
Let's go.
is. I'm really lucky because all year round, there is a German bakery that is 2 or 3 miles away from me that makes really good sourdough bread. And I know the ingredients going into that, and no oils, nothing that I need to really be concerned about. And it works for my body. So I just know myself well enough that I can easily eat that sourdough bread 2 pieces a day and feel really good, get that craving for bread satisfied. I have my sandwich. Like sometimes you just want a sandwich. And I'm that person. I had a sandwich for dinner last night. It was delicious. And it was pro-metabolic for me. Got the heat going, and I slept really, really well last night. So finding a good sourdough bread near you, especially if, like Kelly, you're in California and you don't want to turn your oven on in the summer. Now we're in November. If you're watching this maybe at another time of year, who knows, but currently November, so we can use our ovens again. Um, you can start with your own sourdough starter. They're not too hard to find, especially because of the pandemic. So many people took up baking and specifically sourdough breads. So asking around, asking on social media if you have a friend that has a good sourdough starter, and starting to make your own bread, if that's something that interests you. Um, Otherwise, finding a local bakery that makes it fresh every day, that's really incredible. What I will note is that it's more susceptible to mold. So keeping it in the dark, and I keep mine in the refrigerator, it dries out a little bit faster, but it lasts several weeks that way in the fridge in the dark. If I leave it out on the counter, maybe 7 days, because there are no preservatives in there. So just keep that in mind. And if you're like me and you don't go through bread as quickly, you can also put it in an airtight container and put it in the freezer. And then you just take out 2 slices at a time, or however much you are eating, and go that route. That has been a game changer for me because I do really like bread and I don't want to give it up. So just finding one that works for my system is really nice. What have you found, Kelly, in your
Well,
area?
I was gonna jump in real quick. One thing that I noticed when I was first went paleo, I had cut all grains out and I used to eat an excessive amount of grains. And so of course I felt better just by cutting out grains and starches and things like that that I had been eating regularly. But then of course staying paleo for 6 or 7 years was not the best plan and ultimately caused more harm than good. Um but for me, I know that if I have grains that aren't super clean, it definitely can affect, like I actually get puffy and my face like swells up. Or my gut will swell up a couple inches or something like that. So that's just something that I've been like really aware of in my body. However, that being said, spelt flour, I don't have that reaction, which is really interesting. And so what I love about spelt flour, I don't make my own bread. I'm not that cool yet, but we do make stuff like cookies. We made homemade cinnamon rolls last winter, and then we cut them up and then froze them so that we could like pull out one whenever we wanted one instead of having like 12 of them sitting there staring you in the face on the counter. And we do that a lot with like cookies and muffins and things like that, where we'll make a bunch and then we'll freeze them, and then it just makes it really easy to rebake. So that's something that I think has been super awesome. The Izio brand doesn't have any PUFA in it, so that's a plus, but it is enriched flour with riboflavin and iron and whatever else they stick in there, which is not great. So I do know that grains like that those kinds of flours can also contribute towards colon cancer and things like that. So in excess not a great plan. Once in a while, a better choice than other breads, though, right? Um, so these are things that I always like to. It's so easy to when you start learning about this stuff to be almost like, oh my God, I can't eat anything. But the truth is like you can. You just have to understand how things work.
Mhm.
And that it's about moderation and it's about making the best decisions with the choices available, so whatever your region is, you're working with that, but I just wanted to kind of pop in there because my favorite stuff is the cookies and I do like my cinnamon rolls and my muffins and my treats. And then sometimes I get overwhelmed and I don't, or I get kind of over it and I don't want any more. Spelt flour has also been really great to make biscuits and like tortillas with, which is nice. So that's another thing that my wife and I make. And I think that when it comes to bread products, it's nice having the spelt flour option because sometimes you just want some bread, So
I think
Totally.
a
Yeah.
great point. I bought a 5 pound bag of spelt flour a couple years ago and it says that it's expired, but honestly, I just keep using it and it's fine. I make drop dumplings and that like in soups and there's just something about that that brings me back to my childhood that feels so warm and nourishing and it doesn't hurt my gut at all. So that's another option with that spelt flour too, because it is a really nice option. Now, you might be thinking, why is spelt flour okay over everything we just talked about? Spelt flour is what they consider an ancient grain, which is also now just a marketing term. Um, but it's an older type of grain that has not really been changed. It's not made to grow quickly in harsh environments. It's a little bit of a slower growing, a more easily digestible grain. The other thing I want to mention too, there's so much to talk about on this subject, and there's probably going to be a part two at some point. Um, we have a couple of options. If you're going out to eat and you just want the bread and you don't want to really think about it, cool. I'm that person. That happened yesterday to me where it was my worst day and I didn't have time to cook and I didn't have time to do anything really for myself. And so I had the Costco hot dog. It happens. And the hot dog itself has less than 1 gram of PUFA, which is really great. The bread has some stuff in it. I don't know really what's in the bread. I haven't looked because I don't want to. But I know it's not the best option out there. So when I'm going to have something like that, I know that it's going to deplete riboflavin in the lower intestine when it hits there. And so a lot of the things that we see come up are actually a lack of riboflavin because wheat is using that up in your lower intestine when it hits that area. It's oftentimes why you see your enriched breads, your breads from the grocery store have added riboflavin, but they also have a whole bunch of other stuff like Kelly mentioned, iron added, and other stuff in there that is just not as friendly. And I don't trust their source of riboflavin either, to be honest. So I would rather take riboflavin on my own, where I know that it's made by a trusted company. I know that the only thing in that capsule is riboflavin and the capsule is gelatin and water. So that's an option. If you're going to have bread, take some riboflavin along with it, or at worst the next day, the next morning. Riboflavin can be a little bit activating, so keep that in mind, that if I take it after like 3 p.m., even though I can drink coffee until I go to bed and still fall asleep just fine, riboflavin will keep me up if I take it later in the day. So I try to take it in the morning. And it just helps everything go a little bit smoother and it helps replenish that riboflavin in the gut. This also goes for beer. So if you are a beer drinker, that's going to also deplete riboflavin in lower intestine. So keep in mind that if you are going to have beer, that you might want to also look at a riboflavin supplement too.
And
Um,
like Katie said, I think this is the surface of a really cool topic that we want to dive more into. And I want to drop one last little nugget in here, which is that plants, where they grow to be the source of regeneration for their species and for their own survival. So they contain phyto ingredients and I guess you could call them, they're phytonutrients for the plant, but they're not really phytonutrients for people because a lot of them are deterrents. They actually are supposed to irritate the gut of the animal that eats them to deter them from being eaten. So a grain like a wheat that is maybe something that an animal or a human would come along and eat, it contains acids in it, phytic acid and other things that are gut irritants that cause an inflammation to try and deter that animal from continuing to eat that plant source. So I find that some of the symptoms are, they can be aided with an antihistamine. If I do go and I have a processed bread or something that I'm not sure of the source of it, I'll usually follow it up with more of that care, the riboflavin and maybe an antihistamine before I go to bed. And that usually helps bring the level of irritation down for me just a bit. And I think that puffiness in my gut usually comes from that kind of histamine reaction. But plants don't want to be eaten. So they have special ways to keep us from eating them, but we've hybridized and we've industrialized in order to use those like poor nutrient load foods to feed a wider and wider number of people. And it's okay on the surface. I mean, it looks like it's nutrient, but it doesn't really act that way when it gets inside of us.
Really good point, Kelly. Thank you.
And I know for gluten intolerances, true celiacs is actually super rare. So a lot of the gluten intolerances that people experience comes from damage to the villi and the small intestine over time. And especially if you've been eating a diet high in gums and carrageenans as well, that can really be the one of the primary things that is contributing towards some of the grain intolerance. So what's cool is that if you can cut all those additives out, if you can cut out the grains maybe for a while, if you do have an intolerance, maybe work on healing the gut lining with glycine and collagen and stuff like that that actually helps rebuild the wall of the intestine. You can most likely have had a lot of clients have this experience where they can actually eat grains again and not have a problem. So I think that's just another like shout out. Like a lot of times people think that their issue is something that they have to live with forever. It maybe, but I always say let's see once we fix things on a foundational level, you might find that you actually tolerate a lot of things. You know, most allergies come from deficits in minerals and vitamins anyway. So
Yeah, that was definitely my case. I grew up with a really serious allergic reaction to coconut and having to carry an EpiPen on me for many, many years after it got to the point where I needed to carry an EpiPen with me. And it was terrifying to finally get into Z Health, and everyone was like, you should use coconut oil to cook things in. I'm like, I can't do that. That's not going to happen for me. And I really just went after histamine levels and eliminated gums and carrageenan as much as possible. So I lecithin, those emulsifiers. And now I have coconut oil every day. I can eat coconut now too. It's gross, you guys. Waiting 32 years to try coconut. I don't need to ever have coconut again, but coconut oil does make my body feel better. It raises my temperatures. It helps my gut. It's a really nice antibacterial and can do a lot of good things for your gut. And so cooking with coconut oil, along with its higher smoke point too, is very helpful. But I just want to let people know, like, we do get over allergies. A lot of times it has to do with what Erin was talking about, high histamine levels for a long time too. So if you actually have had a test and it shows up positive, you are allergic to this or that, that can change. Am I saying to just go eat all the things you're allergic to? No. But with a lot of time and consideration and changing things around, there are safe ways to try things, to switch things around and hopefully add more to your diet over time.
awesome. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode. I hope you guys like it. If you want to learn more, please message us. You're welcome to join our Facebook group. I want to just make this quick announcement. If you're trying to join our Facebook group and we haven't let you in yet, it's probably because you didn't answer the questions and because of the high level of spammers that are on Facebook. We are protective of who we allow into the group. So please make sure you answer the group questions before you try to join our group. So that way we actually know who you are. And if you forgot to do the questions or something and you asked to join and we haven't let you in yet, message us directly. We'd be happy to have a real conversation with a real person. We just do not want to allow spammers into our group. So,
Yeah.
all right, you guys, we'll see you in the next video.
Bye.